Friends, welcome to the February episode of Tim's Travails with amazing IP attorney and author Timothy Trainer. Today, he is going to talk with a wonderful friend of his, Peter Fowler, who is a former senior counsel from the Office of Policy and International Affairs at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, lovingly known as the USPTO. And Peter is just a fascinating person who we're thrilled to bring on the show. He retired this month where we're recording January 2026, so we have the privilege of interviewing him for February of 2026. He has more than 30 years of experience at the USPTO. Initially, he worked on copyright issues and served as the facilitator of the Conference of Fair Use and later as agency chief of staff. During his long tenure, he filled various positions, including acting deputy administrator for external affairs, senior advisor for the Undersecretary of Commerce for Intellectual Property, and regional intellectual property attaché for Southeast Asia. He's a member of the advisory boards of the Asia Pacific Research and Training Network on Trade and the UN Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific region. Wow, Peter, what a legacy. So impressive and so happy to have you here. I'm Hope Katz-Gibbs, proud producer of the show on Incandescent Radio and Incandescent TV. And now I'm going to throw this fascinating conversation where they'll be talking about an invisible public servant. It's the mission. So take it away, Tim.
Thank you, Hope, and thank you, Peter, for joining me today.
Well, to hear Hope lay it out that way, it does sound like I did something there for 30 years. But thank you very much, Tim, for having me on. It's a pleasure. You and I go back
Yeah,
decades,
yeah,
and
yeah,
I still lovingly remember and have told people on several occasions the time that we were on our way to go to Vietnam,
yes,
and we had been delayed out of DC, and we were trying to connect in LAX, and we did this sort of I don't know, kind of a O.J. Simpson run through the airport. Maybe that's not politically correct to say now, but at any rate, we were running and running and running to make it. And I seem to have lost you at one point in LAX, and then you followed up. So,
yeah.
but we made the plane.
We did make the plane and we got to Vietnam. And I think, but you'd already been there before. And I think
Yeah.
maybe that was my first or second time. And so it was a parts of that trip are still in my mind very interesting. I do remember, I think it's the same trip where were we in Hanoi that year or
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
and
We were in Hanoi.
I still remember the the translators who were actually terrible. And I remember meeting up with them the day before, and we went over the material, and I was reassured that the guy that was going to be translating for me, oh yeah, everything was be fine. And as I was speaking the next day, off to my left, there was a Vietnamese woman who worked at the U.S. Embassy sitting there and giving me the hand signal to slow down because she was listening to the translation. And so I started to slow down and I started up again. And all of a sudden, I see her giving me the signal to slow down some more. And I thought, if I slow down anymore, I won't be talking. And so it just got, from that point, I completely lost where I was mentally in my presentation. So that part was really memorable. It was my first time really having a problem with a translator. And that one I just never forgot simply because I thought, well, if I keep slowing down, we'll have silence in the room waiting for this guy to catch up wherever he is. But
Well, the first few years in Vietnam with interpreters and translators, I sort of assumed at a certain point that if 50% of what I was saying actually made it through in some sort of
yeah,
sensible, understandable English or Vietnamese, I guess on their side, that was pretty good
yeah,
because there was not a lot of expertise to
right.
draw on.
No, that's
Um,
true.
and the first time I went as part of the then bilateral trade agreement negotiations, we were over in the Ministry of Trade early in the morning and, getting ready. And this interpreter came up to me and introduced himself and said he was going to be doing um, the simultaneous interpretation. I said, great. And he said, could you tell me what intellectual property is? Now, I used to teach intellectual property and other things in law school, and I unfortunately thought he was asking a very academic question. And so I started to give him this kind of answer of like maybe, a law professor would. And he interrupted me and he said, thank you, but I just need to know what intellectual property is because we don't have a word for it in Vietnamese.
Oh, okay.
And
Yeah.
I said, oh, okay, back down to basics.
Yeah.
So
Very
I
basic.
sort of explained it. Um, but what I found after now more than 30 years of interfacing, with the Vietnamese, trust me, they have words for intellectual
Yeah.
property. They probably more than any other country in my experience in the last 30 years took to intellectual property concepts stronger uh, in a way that the government really did finally get it.
Hmm.
They integrated it into policy because early on, if you talk to government officials, as I did, and not just in Vietnam, but in much of Southeast Asia and the Pacific, when you talked about intellectual property, you really had to, I hate to say it, dumb it down.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah.
Most of them had no clue what you were really talking about. They didn't understand the benefits of intellectual property being integrated. They didn't understand the economic aspects of it, the potential for job growth, to attract investment, all the kinds of things, you tend to learn and argue from a policy standpoint of why you need stronger intellectual property legislation and a stronger environment.
Yeah.
Um, but Vietnam, oh my God, has taken to it very strongly. Uh, and back in that day when you and I were first going there, you have to kind of remember now, it was a country that did not even have a real property law. There was
Right.
no right to personal property. There was
Yeah.
no right to real property. And so when you came in and you started, I was talking, or others would talk about intellectual property,
Yeah.
conceptually, it was difficult for them to
Yeah.
really grasp what you were talking about. But they studied it,
Oh, yeah.
and
No, I would
that
agree with
amazing.
you. Yeah. It's the different times that I've been to Vietnam. There's no doubt that they look at their economy and the development very seriously. And of course, nowadays, I mean, they want to be a hub in the software and technology areas for Southeast
Absolutely.
Asia, or and just they're just another one of the Asian tiger kind of countries as far as the economic side. And I will say one of the things that really threw me was back in this going back almost 30 years now, but 1997. I was in Moscow, and within a matter of about 6 weeks, I was in Vietnam. And the difference in the economic and commercial environment, the activity levels between Russia and Vietnam, even in 1997, it was night and day. Russia, you went into the stores in Moscow, shelves were empty, people were just standing around, nothing's happening. And a few weeks later, I'm in Vietnam, and I mean the hustle, bustle, product everywhere. Yes, a lot of it they were knockoffs or whatever, but the commercial activity was such that you could see that what was going to happen. You knew that if they were allowed to go, they were just going to, rush in and start doing things just like they have. So it's really not a surprise from what I saw almost 30 years ago that you see a vibrant commercial, economic powerhouse that's really there to develop and keep going.
Yeah. Now it struck me from very early, from my first trip there,
Yeah,
um, was just walking around Hanoi and then later Saigon.
yeah.
Um, every block, you would see, apartments or houses or whatever, but the first floor, it was a store.
Hmm.
It was a little grocery store. It was some, a haircut salon. It was a beauty salon. It was this. It was a fashion store. It
Yeah,
was there was a mechanics working. They were doing something
yeah,
almost at the ground level,
yeah.
almost everybody. And what Vietnamese told me was that, yeah, almost every family has a business.
Hmm.
So someone is selling or doing or cooking or whatever. They're
Yeah.
operating a business out of where they live,
Yeah.
and they live upstairs or in the back or whatever. Very industrious
Yeah.
country and
Yeah.
very industrious people.
Right. No,
It's not to
absolutely.
say that people in other countries aren't industrious, but you just saw it
Yes.
daily in
Absolutely.
such such an obvious way in Vietnam. And so it's no surprise that they have grown tremendously.
Yeah.
Uh, and the U.S. has benefited.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely.
we're the number one trading partner with
Yeah.
Vietnam.
Yeah.
All the other Southeast Asian countries, the number one trading partner is China, and we are probably the number two or three.
Yeah.
But with Vietnam, we're the number one.
Yeah.
We're the
Yeah.
number one destination for all their exports. And
And it's a beautiful country, by the way, if you ever want to
that
go there as
too.
a tourist. I mean, I've been there several times, and from that perspective, it's a gorgeous country. It's just that you got to be prepared for the heat and the humidity. That's all.
Yeah.
That's what you have to really be prepared for. But, since we've kind of zoomed and taken Vietnam as a bit of an example, I want to take you back for a moment because I know when I was, I guess, reminding myself of your bio, and you came into the Patent and Trademark Office actually to deal with copyright issues.
Yes.
And you're yeah, and over these 3 decades, I mean, on the one hand, few things are very, very standard and don't change. But given copyright and its relationship with technology, what are the two or three biggest changes you're seeing as far as trying to deal with issues of copyright these days?
it's hard to limit it to
Yeah.
two or three. Um, I've told the story to colleagues and others a number of times, but I was persuaded by then the USPTO's head was a commissioner, Bruce Lehman, and I'd gotten to know him, in the early '90s, et cetera. Um, and he kept saying early on in the Clinton administration, he said, you should come to Washington and work on intellectual property and copyright. And I was doing private practice in San Francisco. I was in a boutique firm, and I did mostly copyright, trademark, and entertainment law.
Hmm.
And he said, "That's a perfect background. You should come and work at the USPTO." And I said to him, I thought there were just patent and trademark attorneys there. And he said, no, no, no. There's actually a Office of Policy and
Yeah.
Legislative Affairs, and there's copyright attorneys. And not too many, but it's an exciting field.
Yeah.
Bruce Lehman was a copyright expert
Yes.
himself, and he
Yeah.
was the first non-patent person to ever be, in modern day at least, the head of the Patent and Trademark Office. Didn't sit too well with some in the patent community, but he came into the PTO with quite an agenda on the
Uh-huh.
copyright side. And one time over lunch in San Francisco, when he was kind of pitching a job as a copyright attorney at the PTO, he said, and I'll quote, "This internet thing, it's going to be really big." Now, this was in 1994.
Yeah.
And, most law firms didn't even have email,
Yeah.
um, let alone the internet as a commercial thing
Yeah.
really just didn't exist yet. And I remember after that lunch going back to the office, and there's one of my senior partners, Bruce Lilienthal, who was uh, he was a marvelous person, a great attorney, and a computer nerd to the core. And he used to build his own computers, and he had gotten us a LinkedIn networked computer system made
Hmm.
out of a whole bunch of IBMs or something in the office. So we all had computers and we're doing stuff with word processing, et cetera, when many law firms still didn't even do that.
Yeah.
And we were the first law firm in San Francisco to be listed in the Bar Association of San Francisco with an email and a website. So I knew I was asking the right person. I said, Bruce, what is the internet? And then about an hour later, when he stopped talking, I thought, okay, there is a potential. Bruce Lehman sees something.
Yeah.
Um, and so when I joined as a copyright attorney in the office, I was only the 12th attorney in the office and only the third copyright attorney.
Right.
And the very day I started, um, Lehman was holding a press conference to announce what was called the white paper.
Oh,
Um,
yes. Yeah.
the
Yeah. I
white
remember.
paper was basically the roadmap
Yeah.
to the what became the WIPO copyright treaty and the phonogram and
Yeah.
performances treaty, the internet treaties, and the DMCA, the Digital
Hmm.
Millennium Copyright Act.
Yeah.
And he handed over to me the first day. One of the things that I was going to do was to facilitate the Conference on Fair Use, which had been created by Al Gore's National Information
Oh,
Infrastructure
interesting. Yeah.
Superhighway Task Force or
Yeah.
something. And people still called it that back then
Yeah.
because the internet was still kind of not the name that everyone used
Right.
commonly. Um, and so, yeah, copyright was seen to be, and Lehman proved to be absolutely a visionary and correct, that the area of copyright law would be impacted dramatically and
Yes.
quickly
Yes.
by the expansion of the internet
Yeah.
because what was able to be transmitted digitally was
Yes.
music, eventually film,
Yeah.
photographs, books, etc.,
Yeah.
printed material.
Yeah.
And you probably remember back in the late 90s and early 2000s, various trade associations like the Recording Industry
Yeah.
of America Association, um, began to bring a lot of lawsuits against
Hmm.
people for illegal downloading of music
Yeah.
and performances, bootleg versions, et cetera, et cetera. It proved to be controversial. It also proved to be totally impossible
Yeah.
to benefit the recording industry in any positive way
Right.
because they could never get a handle on it,
Oh, no.
and the litigation did nothing but cause bad feelings and bad press. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
but those back in those days, the big association, the Motion Picture Association of America, the Association of American Publishers, and
Yeah.
others, the Business Software Alliance, they thought that I think their members were too beholden to an old business model,
Right.
and
Not
that
able to
business
compete.
model
Yeah.
wasn't adapting
Yeah.
to the new reality
Yeah.
of what would be the new reality of the internet. And I saw that firsthand working on the DMCA and also the during the diplomatic conference to bring about the WIPO internet treaties. Um, the vast majority of countries at the diplomatic conference in 1990, in December of 1996, they didn't know what the internet was. And no, and there were representatives, ambassadors, and other representatives from, for example, African and Middle Eastern countries, some Asian countries, who would say at the diplomatic conference, "We don't know what this is.
Yeah.
We don't know how this will impact anything in
Yeah.
copyright.
Well, I think
We don't have an industry that's
no,
in. Why
I
should we
think
do this?"
I think the problem, when we were going after all of the mountains of illegal copying that was going on in places like Taiwan and Hong Kong
Yeah,
and South Korea, you could tell when you met with the government side, because we had to deal with the government side, that a lot of these, I mean, this, first of all, going back to what you said about somebody in Vietnam asking you, what is intellectual property? All right, that's one question. The
right,
second question is, well, what is copyright? And then the other question is, well, what's wrong with copying? Because in some of these cultures, copying was, a good thing, or at least that's the way they thought. They didn't think of this whole idea of copying like we do here in the United States and in Western countries about the creator having some kind of right to whatever they create.
That is so true, Tim. I learned that in Southeast Asia very firsthand and in China that artists, writers, and others, when they went to school, when they went to art school, when they went to study literature, uh, their their method of instruction was to copy.
Yeah.
And copying the great masters
Yes.
um, was viewed as a way to learn technique, a way to learn, how to create art, carving, painting, writing,
Well,
poetry,
if you
etc.
take traditional calligraphy,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
that is incredibly all about how well you can actually duplicate the original.
Right. And so you're absolutely right. I think cultures that did not have the same early use of copyright or applied copyright in a commercial context as happened in England, in
Hmm.
Great Britain, um, and then later in the continent, they saw it differently.
Yeah.
And it has taken a lot of effort, decades and decades of effort at
Yep.
the international treaty, stage and level, and in training and capacity building and education and trying to get across the message that you're that creation of original works, whether it's music, film, photography, writing,
Yeah.
literature, whatever, is it can be a commercially valuable thing. It can be an industry. It
Right.
can, whether it's the publishing industry, whether it's the software industry and development and publishing industry, whether it's the motion picture industry, et cetera.
Yeah.
And that that has been, I don't know, a through line perhaps in almost everything that I did
Yeah.
in the last 30 some years, and still continuing on the copyright side because once the World Trade Organization, TRIPS agreement, the agreement on the trade related aspects of intellectual property, became a thing under the WTO in 95. And all the WTO members were given, most of them were given 5 years to come into compliance,
Yeah.
knowing it would take many of them much, much longer.
Hmm.
Um, what that effort was basically all the WTO members who didn't already have more modern copyright laws needed to now sit down and draft and revise new laws, new regulations. But more importantly, they had to explain from a policy standpoint to legislators and parliamentarians, to people in the industry, people in academia, people in education,
Yeah.
everybody, why
Yeah.
this was necessary. For a long time, what I heard from many countries was, um, well, we have to do it because we have to do it. It was a trade thing. And
Yeah.
if you wanted to have trade relations, if you needed to comply with the WTO, if you needed to do whatever in the trade realm, you needed to do what the U.S. and in some Europe, Japan, others wanted you to do in areas of intellectual property. So at first it was begrudging.
Oh, yes.
It was very difficult. Um, there was not much capacity, as we would say, within governments to fully socialize it and understand it and to turn the ideas into workable
Yeah.
policy and legislation. And so, what quickly became obvious at the USPTO was that one of the trade-offs for all of these countries, developing and least developed countries, buying into the intellectual property norms that had been set under the TRIPS agreement, the developed countries had to now put up or shut up in terms of training and technical assistance, capacity building, et cetera. And initially, a lot of that was done on legislation
Yeah.
to get them to the point where they could comply. Um, but more importantly, and far more importantly in the long term, was the fact that just having the laws passed that read
Nothing.
correctly. Yes, exactly. That's nothing.
Yeah.
Um, you needed to develop the capacity in a whole lot of areas and with governmental actors who, up until the TRIPS agreement, never had any worry, concern with intellectual property. We're
Well,
talking about mostly customs officials, um, public prosecutors, law enforcement, and most importantly, in my view, and continues to be a concern, the courts,
yeah. Yeah.
judges. There had been in many of those cases, for example, in Southeast Asia, most countries, there was no history of litigation over intellectual property.
Well, yeah. And I can tell you that I remember being in law school and I was interning with a federal judge. And she had a patent case before her, and I can tell you how lost she was because even for her as a federal judge who'd been on the bench for years, I mean, getting a patent case was like getting something that dropped in from Mars. It's like, what is this? And literally the attorneys for the two sides in the case had to literally take her hand and walk her through every single bit of that case because this was not something she was at all familiar with. And even in the United States, I mean, federal judges just really didn't like getting intellectual property cases. If there was a way to get rid of that case off that docket, they would do it, or they would delay or do anything practically. And one case that I remember, and this is going back when I still worked at the U.S. Customs Service, I
Mhm.
had a situation where we had a seizure take place and what I realized is one of the parties in my case at Customs was actually in federal court over the same issue. And I thought, well, I'll sit back and wait for a federal judge to make a ruling. And months passed. And here we are as Customs holding a shipment that somebody's been waiting for months. And
Right.
finally, I went to my supervisor. I said, look, we've had this now for like 7, 8 months. I don't know what's going on in the federal court, but I'm going to write a ruling. And I wrote the ruling, and it was hilarious. Within 6 weeks, all of a sudden, the federal judge issues his ruling. You know what he did? He cited my ruling as a basis for the copyright decision he made. I mean, there were other non-copyright issues, but he didn't want to deal with the copyright issue, apparently. And so he had heard that there was a case at Customs. He didn't know who or what or whatever it was, just that there was a similarity and I couldn't believe that he'd been waiting for me while I had been waiting for him. And that's
Well,
how badly some of these judges just did not want to touch an intellectual property case of any kind.
well, in retrospect, it's good that you were impatient.
Well, believe me, my bosses were a little bit leery about me doing that because they said, well, we're not a court, you're not an administrative law judge, you're just, a staff lawyer writing a ruling. And I said, yeah, but how long are we going to make the importers and the copyright owner wait for a decision? I mean, we've got a shipment hung up and it's been sitting there for, at that point, it have been 8 or 9 months.
Well, as you well know, I mean, the U.S. Customs Office of, Regulations and Rulings is really a unique
Yes.
animal in terms of
Yes.
in terms of not only intellectual property rulings administratively, but also internationally. There's almost no analog to that in
No.
other customs administrations around the
Yeah.
world,
Yeah.
and yet it has proven so tremendously helpful
Well, just
in the U.S.
as an aside, I mean, I was at Customs before we even had the Intellectual Property Office in the Office of Regulations and Rulings. And we were simply a task force back. This is now 1988, 89. And I was one of the three original lawyers that became part of the Intellectual Property Rights Office within the Office of Regulations and Rulings. So we were there, I was there at that beginning. And yeah, we were doing things that nobody else was doing. We'd have a lot of people customs people from other countries asking us, "What in the hell what are you doing?"
Well,
And we would tell
you
them,
were the first,
"Yeah,
really, the enforcement attorney to come over to the
yes,
USPTO.
yeah,
When Bob Stoll sort of saw the future of where training and capacity building and technical assistance was moving, it was really, and I totally agreed with it at the time. It was really into the area of dealing with enforcement
yeah,
because whether it was anti-piracy in the copyright field or anti-counterfeiting in the trademark or trade secret theft or misappropriation or even patent infringement, um, that even that though in the U.S. we don't criminalize that, uh, other countries were desperate to know
oh
more.
yeah,
And that really became much of what I ended up then doing
yeah,
from about 2003 till just earlier this month, um, was in the area of enforcement.
yeah,
And the team at the PTO, of course, grew and grew. Um, Unfortunately, fortunately, we had years and years, and it was seen as a very bipartisan
yeah,
supported thing to work with and engage and partner with foreign governments.
yeah,
Again, whether it was an office of an attorney general or law enforcement or police or the courts, the customs. That was all seen as within the mission of the USPTO
oh yeah,
because we were the experts.
yeah,
We did the best job of helping to coordinate other US government agencies like
hmm,
Department of Justice and FBI, Customs and Border Protection, et cetera, and others, FDA, who bring their expertise to it
yeah,
as well.
yeah,
And I feel like we did and accomplished a lot over the last 20 years or more, actually. Um, and I have to say, I guess maybe this is where I can say I'm no longer a spokesperson for the US government being retired. Um, I disagree strongly with the current management of the USPTO and the current administration not putting a value on that type of technical assistance and training and capacity building.
right,
In fact, I have been told, we were all told, that calling a program training and capacity building was a no-no. Those are bad words. Don't use those words anymore.
well,
That's out of favor. Um, Technical assistance, yeah, if it doesn't cost us anything, you can do a virtual program if you want. But the hands-on interaction and engagement with overseas enforcement authorities is completely off the table these
yeah.
days. Um,
Yeah, and I think when we talk about that side of things, and you and I have both been involved in it, and I'm going to eventually ask you to maybe expound on a little bit more. But when we're doing these things with foreign government officials or foreign business organizations, frankly, a lot of that's being done in order to also pave the way for U.S. businesses that are in those countries to succeed. And
Absolutely.
so if we were to say, let's say, for example, we spend $100,000 or $200,000 on training or capacity building in a particular country. The goal, however, is for U.S. businesses to take advantage of exploiting their intellectual property assets to generate revenue, right? And it's going to be a lot more than 100 or $200,000. They're looking at 7 and 8 figures here, and that's what their goals are. If we can help them have a better commercial environment.
Yes, I can absolutely say without any question that almost everything that we did in that area was strongly supported by IP
Yeah,
rights holders, IP owners, brands, the stakeholders in the US,
yeah,
because you know, whether or not they have actual investments in a foreign country, and many of them do.
yeah,
They have subsidiaries, they have distributors, they have joint ventures, they have all kinds of business activities. Many of the countries are where they source their materials or their supplies, or they do the manufacturing. But even for those who don't have that kind of physical connection, presence, economic investment, their brands,
Yeah.
their products are being sold online in those countries. They've been distributed in those countries. They are encountering, in some cases, counterfeits of their products in those
Sure.
countries. And so the more um, developed capacity of law enforcement, customs, the courts, prosecutors,
Yeah.
others in those foreign governments to be able to recognize the issue, recognize the problem, take legitimate and effective action against it under their laws. And in most cases, those laws now do allow for effective action. You have to have the political will. An attorney general, for example, or a chief prosecutor, or the courts have to want to take these cases
Yeah.
and deal with them in a fair, responsible, timely
Right.
fashion.
Right.
I can remember hearing horror stories early on, and not that long ago, uh, from various different U.S. brand owners who had, in some cases, what we'll call just, a simple run-of-the-mill garden trademark infringement case in a country, say in Southeast Asia. And they brought the case as a civil matter. And, 15, 20 years later, they're still in the legal system.
Yeah.
It's gone up and down on appeals. It's been delayed. There's been changes of judges, changes of attorneys. I mean, the worst case scenario, and I'm not exaggerating, the worst one I ever heard of was North Face. North Face had a trademark and trade secret misappropriation case
Hmm.
that was in the Philippines judicial system for 50 years.
5-0.
50, 50,
Wow.
50 years. It went up to the Supreme Court three different times. And it was delayed, 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 delayed. It took almost 17 years the first time around for a final trial decision.
That's
So, I mean, that's like the worst case scenario one could even
yeah.
begin to imagine. I mean, that's like Bleak House all over again, 50 years. But it wasn't uncommon
Yeah.
that, and what was actually more common was how long it took. For example, maybe there's no love lost with a lot of pharmaceutical companies. They're not sometimes the most sympathetic, um, the IP owners.
Right.
But sometimes it would take them 18, 19 and a half years to get a patent
Yeah.
issued in a country. Now, for those who don't know, under TRIPS, the term for a patent is only 20 years.
Right.
So when you're a pharmaceutical company and a patent office somewhere in Southeast Asia, in around 19 and a half years after filing the application, they issue it to you. Your patent term is 6 months.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, and I saw those kinds of cases. And one was they had about a month left out of the 20 years. So it'd been like more than almost 19 years and 11 months that it took just to get the patent,
Just to get the patent. Yeah.
just to get the patent.
Yeah.
And then it becomes, public use.
Right.
But it wasn't that, again, kind of a worst case scenario, but not uncommon. And you would see the same thing, maybe not to quite the same extent in terms of protracted delays, but the same thing going on for 5, 6, 7,
Yeah.
8, 10 years, sometimes for a trademark.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
trademark squatting
Right.
was such a
Well,
crucial issue.
And that
for
got to be even worse with, again, with the development of the internet back in the day
absolutely.
and
Mhm.
domain names and the World Intellectual Property Organization having to set up a whole new tribunal system so that globally you could bring these cases and hopefully knock down some of these companies that were, or individuals. A lot of times there were also individuals that would just simply grab up a whole bunch of domain names and then basically say, okay, if you want it as the company that legitimately owns it, you have to pay me. And it's so a bit of extortion going on. And we tried to come up with a system to deal with that.
I remember a very long time well-known Rouse investigator in China
Oh, yeah, I know. Yeah.
saying how they had investigated on behalf of their clients various different trademark counterfeiting. And they discovered that there were these groups in China
Yeah.
that were set up to do nothing but monitor all of the trademark applications being filed in all of the major trademark offices in the world, Japan, South Korea, the US, the EU, IPO, etc. And you'd say, well, okay, why? The answer is as soon as they saw that
Yeah.
X company was filing an application for a new trademark, which wasn't even in use, it hadn't even been registered yet,
Right.
they were filing in other countries.
Yeah.
They were
Yeah.
producing products with the new trademark that had been applied for. And in many cases, were successfully registering those applications for that trademark in, oh, I don't know, Indonesia, in
Yeah.
Malaysia, in Bangladesh, in other,
Yeah.
let alone in China. And so, same thing goes on in the fashion area
Oh,
with
yeah.
designs. During the actual, runway fashion walk, when a new line is being shown for the first time, and of course, one of the great advantages here on the internet and broadcasting is the fashion channel,
Yeah.
which, but many of those things are now broadcast on the internet, or
Oh,
you
yeah.
can zoom into them. And you have these groups in China do nothing but they monitor every single thing and are producing a copycat, if you
Yeah.
will, of that design um, for fast fashion, sometimes within
Oh,
hours.
yeah. Yeah.
And they're in the marketplace and they're online in Alibaba or Lazada or some of the Shopee in Southeast Asia or in Asia within 5 days, six
Yeah.
days of it premiering in Milan
No,
on
that's
a walkway.
that's where the challenge is. For one, you've got the so-called legitimate company that's trying to do everything the right way, and you've got all these other people, 100 times more. You've got those others that are just trying to undercut and basically take the concepts and the ideas and just run with them. So it's not easy for the legitimate creator, shall we say, whether it's copyright, trademark, patents, or anything else for that matter, to really do it the way you're supposed to do it when you're being undercut by all these people you're going to have to go after.
Well, people say technology is neutral, which it is, of
It
course.
is, but
But the
it,
technology between the kind of global broadcasting, the internet, the and now with AI, um, it is such a challenge for
yeah,
intellectual property creators and authors and brand owners, um, because it it doesn't matter where your business is located.
no,
It doesn't matter what your business plan is,
right,
or even if you are a small family-owned company in Columbus, Ohio, and you decide that you don't really want to do business in China. Okay? Doesn't matter.
doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. There are companies in China and in other countries around the world who become quickly aware of products
Yeah,
um, and we'll duplicate them, we'll counterfeit them. In some cases, have grown larger than the original genuine company,
yes, yeah, yeah,
and in some cases, try to turn the tables on them
Oh
by
yeah.
registering their trademarks first in other countries where
Yeah.
that country, and of course, we're still stuck. You mentioned earlier about being so far into the 21st century, yet IP is still stuck
Oh yeah.
in a territorial based legal reality.
Correct.
Is that a trademark law or a patent law or a trade secret law or copyright law in some ways, although copyright has gotten away from that a little bit,
A little bit. Yeah.
um, is still territorially bound. So
Yeah.
that customs can only enforce what's in their territory, their administrative territory. They could only, the prosecutors or the law enforcement can only really investigate and really have much of a chance of success of using their limited resources in what happens in their country,
Yeah.
within their borders.
Mhm.
Uh, and IP crime these days, IP activity,
It's
not just crime, is
international.
absolutely, it's transnational, it's transborder, it's international, it's global. And the IP system, in my view, has not really caught up with it. We're still dealing with 17th century concepts of IP and patents, and it still hasn't caught up with the reality. And that's why it struggles
Yeah,
so
no,
much.
it's true. I mean, and then, but on the flip side of the reality, practical side, I mean, if you think about it from the people that we arm, shall we say, to enforce it. I mean, and I mean the government uh, bodies, whether it's police, customs, whomever it may be. I mean, trying to deal with a global system also would just completely overwhelm them in the sense that even if, yes, you have access to a massive database, I mean, it's just, it's so big that they wouldn't be able to do any of the other things they're supposed to do. I mean, this is where, for example, having worked at customs and people don't. I mean, these days they're in the news for all the wrong reasons. But I can say that from an inspector perspective, the guy at the port that's got all that cargo coming in, he's dealing with, oh, is this a toy that a child can choke on, or oh, do the vehicles coming in meet all of our transportation standards? And then we've got the copyright trademark issue, and then all the other things that they are task to monitor and enforce. So it becomes,
Yeah.
frankly, an impossible task. And what I used to say is to the people that wanted us to actually protect their copyright or their trademark, I go, look, it's incumbent on you to come to us. We can't know the tens of thousands of trademarks and the millions of copyrights that are out there that you actually believe are of such value that those are the ones you want protected. And the example I used to use is, for example, let's take a well-known company in the United States like Procter and Gamble. And if you ever go through a store or a drugstore anywhere, take a look at how many trademarks Procter and Gamble actually owns as a major company, because they have so many brands. And I actually had an exercise for my students when I was teaching. I'd say, I want you to look at all the trademarks that are registered at the Patent and Trademark Office that Procter & Gamble has, and then take a look at how many of those are actually in the customs database. And what you will find is that those 20 or 30 trademarks which generate the most revenue for Procter & Gamble, those are the ones they want protected. And so out of the thousands of trademarks they actually own, they're looking at the big money makers and saying, these are the ones that we really are putting our money on to protect, because you can't equally invest in all of them from
No,
an
that's so
enforcement perspective.
that's true. And I think I've also come to realize, and it's not a great surprise, that governments like success. They like to declare victory.
Yeah,
They like to say, here's the problem, and we solved it.
yeah,
Much of IP crime, if you will, is not easily solved.
no,
It takes it's a sustained effort, sustained resources,
yeah,
a sustained political will and
yeah,
commitment. And even in the US,
yeah,
you dial back 10, 15 years ago, um, the Department of Homeland Security was saying that IP crime was like one of the top priorities for them.
Yeah.
Not so much now.
Yeah.
For the Department of Justice, at a point years ago when they were expanding significantly the computer crime and intellectual property, section of the criminal division,
Yeah.
uh, and bringing in expertise and engaging and really providing a lot of resources to go after IP crime. So whether it was the FBI or Homeland Security investigations or whoever, there was a big emphasis on it, and that led to the creation of the National IPR Coordination Center. A lot of resources were devoted to it, the USPTO, the FDA, et cetera. Those days are gone.
Yeah.
Those
Huh.
days, in terms of IP being viewed as a top priority for law enforcement, um, you know, it's in the past. It's in the
Yeah.
rearview mirror now.
Well,
And this administration, but I have to say, the previous administration as well.
hmm.
I'm not blaming
No, no, no. It's
either one.
yeah.
It's just that I think it's kind of notable that, and I've seen this in other developing countries, you know, they'll declare a special campaign
Yeah.
against counterfeits. They'll declare a special enforcement action for the next 3 months or a
Right.
hundred days or something. That's um, it's a good thing to do, but it's always going to be self-defeating.
Yeah.
It helps prioritize it. It helps focus the attention. Maybe it helps raise public awareness. Um, but the reality is that, and not to be a total skeptic here, but you're no government, no government is ever going to completely eradicate
Oh, no.
forever intellectual property theft and counterfeiting, etc. Um, you can get a handle on it. You can make a huge amount of progress. You can virtually control it, much the same way that I've compared it at times to pest control. You know, if you have a building and you want to keep the cockroaches out,
Yeah.
well, then you keep it clean. You spray regularly. You don't allow a lot of open garbage storage,
Yeah.
etc.
Yeah.
You don't have the kind of business there that deals with, the kinds of things that attract cockroaches. Um, but the minute you stop doing that,
Oh, yeah.
they'll come back. And if
Absolutely.
that's true for cockroaches and ants and other kinds of
That's
insects and pests and rats, I mean, how many rat, attempts to control? New York City has, rat control prevention and DC, et cetera. No one's ever gotten rid of rats. They
well,
come back. You can get control over them for a while.
right.
Same thing with counterfeiters and pirates. You can make it difficult.
Yeah.
You can sustain your activity for a while, but governments get tired.
Sure.
They want results, and they don't like to just keep paying and paying and paying and paying and not seeing the problem, quote unquote, solved.
No.
And I think that's the problem with IP. There is no final solution.
No.
Maybe AI eventually will. Who
No.
knows?
We'll
Um,
see.
we'll see.
I think the other component of that is, and I think this is where a lot of the responsibility really falls on the people, the owners of the intellectual property, whether they be corporate or otherwise, and they're the ones that have to keep the government's feet on to the fire, right? Because at the end of the day, how much of a priority it is for government depends upon how much of a priority it really is for those who actually are owners of this asset and how much it's hurting them. So it's really a lot of it is also on them to say, look, this is our number one, two, or three priority. And this is what we really need you to put some resources to. And obviously, I think one of the things I saw over the years is on the one side, we've got the enforcement, but on the other side, it's always going to have to be, you got to educate people on what
Absolutely.
is this? Because so many people, even today, I mean, still don't get a feel for or grasp of or understand really well what we're talking about, right? Because at the end of the day, these are words that they don't stop and think about. And I always try to remind people, I say, look, just walk down the street. Take a look at all the signs that come flying at you, the names on the windows or the signs, or just stand and look at the little emblems on the front of a car. All those logos, well, all those logos and brands, those are trademarks. And that's a form of that asset that they're exploiting to make basically generate revenue. I mean, at the end of the day, I always boil it down to something everybody can relate to. And I say, this is always about money. That's what intellectual property really is. It's investing in something so that you can turn around and generate revenue.
Absolutely. And that revenue and that investment helps economies, helps job
Yes.
growth, and all the things that go with it.
Yeah.
The transition over the last, again, 15, 20 years, where in terms of setting priorities for IP enforcement and engagement in it and awareness education activities, has focused, admittedly, on products that represent a risk of injury or a
Yeah.
risk of harm or health
Right.
and safety concerns. I get that completely. It's a very strategic way to bring in allies in the
Yeah.
health community, in the law enforcement community, the regulatory community, who otherwise might not, if you just say IP, they just kind of
Nobody.
blank out. Yeah, they don't get it. They don't, it's they or they don't see it as part of their job.
Right.
But I
Right.
remember doing one time, a very simple type of a workshop where I brought together fire inspectors, building inspectors, electrical inspectors, plumbing inspectors at the local and state level.
Mm.
And most of them didn't really have much of a background or experience with IP
Yeah.
until we started talking about how they on the first line of defense, because that their job is to do the construction inspection
Yeah.
or construction related inspections so that the building doesn't collapse or doesn't catch fire or the electrical equipment that's put in or the fire detection
Yeah.
or alarms work and things like that. And for many of them, it was really eye-opening that what we were talking about on the anti-counterfeiting side of stronger IP protection, stronger enforcement, was something that they are in a position to really be, again, at the first line of defense,
Yeah.
the first, the first responders in some respects,
Yeah.
because they see, oh my God, this a smoke detector doesn't work.
Yeah.
Why doesn't it work? It's
Yeah.
because it was a counterfeit.
Right.
It wasn't a genuine item. The
Yeah.
electrical, what caused, I remember talking with like arson investigators. It's like, what caused the fire?
Yeah.
Well, that's what their job is to determine. And
Yeah.
in many, many cases, it was substandard
Yeah.
or, as it turns out, counterfeit
Yeah.
electrical equipment, wires, everything else,
One one of
switches.
one of the things that might scare people if they did this almost daily, which is, and we're all familiar with Underwriters Laboratories. They test all sorts of things,
Right,
everything
right.
from toasters and microwaves and fans and so on. And the number of things that they issue to warn people that, X product is not a real product. I mean, it's a counterfeit version of X, right?
Yeah,
And when you see I mean, fire extinguishers, as you say, fire alarms, all these things, everyday small appliances, electrical products that they test constantly in various parts of the world, but every day they issue something where they have found something that proposed, it basically is supposed to be X when it's really Y. And
Right.
scary what they find out there that says Underwriters Lab, blah, blah, blah. But the sticker is a counterfeit sticker. The product doesn't have the proper wiring, blah, blah.
Right. Exactly.
It's really scary stuff. So I think you and I can talk about this stuff probably for the next 6, 8, 10 hours. Um, and I'm looking, we've just got, we haven't really done the questions that we thought we were going to do, but I think
Well,
we kind of
throw
touched
one
on.
at me then.
Yeah, well, no, I was going to say, well, touch on this. Maybe you never know. We may have to do a second one because we've covered a lot already. But I'm looking, and I think we've touched on pieces of every question as we've discussed it because there's just so much here that we can talk about and that we have experienced and seen. And so I might need to say to Hope, hey, we need to do a number two here with Peter because we've got so much because I'd like to think some of it's educational for those who are listening in, and some of it's news, some of it's a different take on things, and I would say I think on a positive thing to a comment on as we end here, Peter, what do you think the biggest benefit is to the U.S. business sector when someone like yourself spends years working in a region outside the United States as an attaché? What is the biggest, benefit to not just the company, but to the country itself? Because some people might say, well, we have people posted abroad, but it's just money going down a hole that's wasted. But I personally don't believe that is because we've already talked about the benefits. But you actually did that for several years.
Yeah. The attaché program at the PTO was actually my baby. I dreamed it up and proposed it in 1999. Then Undersecretary and Director Todd Dickinson saw the price tag of like $5 million and thought that was too much. Um, and a few years later, when the Senate wrote language into an appropriations bill
Yeah,
and forced the USPTO, mandated that the PTO spend $20 billion a year on overseas IP protection, enforcement, training, capacity building, et cetera. Um,
20
I got the
million, right?
chance, 20 million a
Yeah,
year,
yeah,
yes. And uh, I got the chance because suddenly the management at the PTO was running around trying to figure out, oh, how do we spend $20 million a year? Which, you can laugh, but
yeah,
sometimes in government, having to spend a whole lot of money quickly
yeah,
isn't actually
yeah,
an easy thing to do.
right.
So I dusted off and updated my proposal to create an IP attaché corps, um, and expanded at that time to uh, uh, well 10,
Yeah,
um, and with a price tag of 12 billion, and that went swimmingly then. But the idea was from the very beginning was to place people who were experts, because the State Department has econ officers,
yeah,
but they are
you're not,
generalists. They're
yeah,
not specialists in intellectual property. Every now and then you might find one that actually had a background or exposure to IP, but it's rare.
right.
So the idea was the USPTO, being the expert agency on IP, would have a group of attachés who would be posted at embassies and consulates around the world, to act as a local resource for other U.S. government agencies and personnel, to act as a spokesperson for the U.S. government, so to speak, and the USPTO on IP policy matters, to coordinate training, capacity building, technical assistance in their country region, and to basically be boots on the ground,
Yeah,
a first responder, a spokesperson, a person who can go to things, can go to a university class and talk about patents, to go to a local chamber of commerce and talk about trade secrets or export enforcement of IP, to go to meet with artists or authors or software developers, et cetera, and to talk about the importance of IP and not just what it is, but
Yeah.
also to do what I always viewed as a lot of missionary work.
Yeah.
That you're laying the ground, you're cultivating attitudes about IP and putting a positive spin on it
Yeah.
and not just a negative one, which in the trade relationship with USTR was always kind of, if a country was listed on the special 301, that was a negative thing.
Right. Right.
And that we wanted it to be a US government person talking positively about IP, not
Right.
negatively about what they were doing wrong, but rather what could they do right,
Yeah.
do
Yeah.
positively, and how do you assist those countries and those business communities in growing their own IP?
Yeah.
Because nothing succeeds in convincing governments of the importance of stronger IP protection enforcement as having a domestic constituency that actually produces and exports and makes IP reliant products, brands, etc.
And generate
So
thinking. Yeah. I mean, it puts tax dollars in their coffer.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And it makes them also, when you're leveling the playing field, this is why like the courts and law enforcement become so important. When you're leveling the playing field, US companies and brand owners and IP rights holders can feel like they can do business in another
Yeah.
country because if they have a problem, which they inevitably will, okay, with an infringement or a theft or something, they can go to court and be treated fairly. They
Yeah.
can get timely, effective treatment under local laws and local procedure. And what it also did was it helped produce, um, and I know those who don't particularly like lawyers won't see this particularly as a positive thing, but by creating more IP in a country, it created the need and demand for, guess what? More IP lawyers, and the IP bar
Yeah.
grew and grew. And the more IP lawyers there are, the more judges there are, the more prosecutors there are, the more people advising companies on how to protect and develop their own IP, et cetera. It creates an entire ecology and environment of IP positive growth that can be sustained.
Yeah.
Because I once said at a Fordham speech that if you view uh, this developing country as just a large plot of land with nothing but weeds in it. There's no positive IP. There's no flowers. There's no agriculture. There's just a barren kind of it's shrubs and weeds and whatever. You can't change that overnight.
No.
You've got to go in, you've got to till the land, you've got to put in fertilizer, you've got to water it, you've got to plant the seeds and the bulbs, and you've got to fence it off so that predators can't get to it and the rabbits don't eat the lettuce and all that.
Right.
And in effect, if you do that, you can grow an IP garden
Yeah.
out of what is otherwise worthless land
Yeah.
and weed strewn, yard.
No.
Um, and I think that's still, it sounds hokey, but I think it's still true
No.
that
Yeah.
the
I would
governments
agree
that
with
have
you.
done that have grown.
Yeah.
Whether you take Thailand or Vietnam or the Philippines or Malaysia, they've all grown their gardens, so to
Yeah.
speak.
And
And it's
and
true in other places.
sure. It absolutely is. I think it's also I think at this point maybe a good place to kind of wrap this up, but
Yeah,
appreciate all of this conversation's been very good. And the only thing I would say is it's a work in progress. It's not going to
absolutely.
end. I know there's still places around the world where there's a lot of need for capacity building, technical assistance, whatever words they don't like, that's fine. I'll still use them. And so the education process has to continue. It's a never-ending thing. But it can be for some of us, like yourself, me. I know I get a lot of satisfaction, and I've gotten lots of satisfaction interacting with university students, business groups, so on in these countries. Because if you approach it the right way, you can make progress. It's slow, it takes time, but it can happen.
That's
And
so true, Tim.
yeah,
Absolutely. And having been an IP attache, I saw that firsthand.
and
And with 30 years of perspective, it's true. Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, none of them are the same as they were 30 years ago.
right.
They
No,
have all
absolutely.
improved tremendously. And you don't have to explain what IP is to anybody.
Well, I want to thank you for giving us so much of your time today. It's been really fun to have this conversation, Peter. It's been a while since we've been together, but we you and I think we could probably spend the rest of the day talking about this. But
Well,
I know there are things I've got to get done today, so
well,
we'll kind of wrap it
if
up.
not on a podcast over lunch sometime, Tim.
I
Thanks
love
so
it.
much.
Well,
Yes,
thank you both
Thank you,
for,
Mo.
oh, of course, thank you both for giving us insight into this information that we would never have access to. And just this behind the scenes view is so powerful. So thank you, Peter Fowler, former senior counsel for USPTO. Good luck in retirement. Have a ball. I know you'll fill up your time with magical things and come up with even more creative opportunities. And of course, thank you, Tim Trainer, for being the host of Tim's Travails. We always love getting insight into what's inside your brain. So, I'm Hope Gatzgibb, proud producer of the show on Incandescent Radio, Incandescent TV, and you can also find Tim's Travails on Spotify, iHeartRadio, and Apple Podcasts. So we will talk to you next month. Peter, absolutely. We're going to have a panel, Tim, I think, on some of these, and we'll do it at Elaine's Literary Salon
oh,
in
well, there we go.
Alexandria, Virginia, which is where Tim and I met a year ago. So
Yeah.
thank you both. All right, all of our audience, thank you. We'll talk to you next month.
Thank